Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. This will be episode 2 of my 2024 Arnold Classic preview series. I'm trying to compare most of the lineup against each other so we get some proper build up to this year's Arnold. However, this comparison is a little different. Andrew Jacked and Rubiel Mosquera, aka Neckzilla, were both expected to be major contenders at this year's Arnold. But Andrew has dropped out not just of the Arnold Ohio, but the Arnold UK as well, and Neckzilla was unable to get his visa in time for the Arnold Ohio, and now he's seemingly pulled out of the Arnold UK now. So unfortunately, we won't get to see these two guys together on stage, at least until maybe this year's Olympia, but I still wanted to discuss these two. So today's video won't really help us with future predictions or give us any clues as to what the actual results will be. This was simply a what if scenario. And it was one of the bigger ones heading into this year's Arnold. What if Neckzilla and Andrew Jacked did get on the Arnold stage in 2024? Well, let's jump into today's comparison to find out. If you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. You'll notice that I do have two Andrews in this comparison with Neckzilla. That's because there was a big difference between the two shows that Andrew did last year. He did the Texas Pro and won, looking the best he's ever looked. And then at the Olympia last year, he managed to still place 5th, but he was noticeably off. So I wanted to make the point that that version of Andrew, if we got something similar, was vulnerable heading into this year's Arnold. And Neckzilla has a lot of doubters, so I wanted to run two scenarios. One with a proper Andrew Jacked and one where he was fairly bad, relatively speaking, of course. Anyway, I'll talk more about that at the end. Let's discuss the first pose, the front double biceps. These first couple of shots are going to be Andrew's strongest. Take a look at him in the Texas Pro. That is a work of art. He isn't the most thickly developed guy out there, but when you are still pretty complete from the front and bring 11 out of 10 aesthetics like this, size doesn't matter as much. And he's still very detailed. In all of these overall physique aspects, Texas Andrew wins clearly. He has much better polish compared to Neckzilla, and he clearly has the more appealing outline and flow. But honestly, for what Neckzilla is, a mass monster first and foremost, we've definitely seen worse shape out there. He's not a work of art like Andrew, but he still has the waistline under control, and with his huge, and I do mean huge quads, he still brings a good X-frame. Still though, he's obviously not too balanced because he's very bottom heavy, and he does have some pretty thick skin in the legs hiding some of that detail. Now in terms of the arms, I have to give Andrew the win. I think Andrew's arms are actually underrated. He does lack in the forearms a bit compared to Neckzilla, but Andrew surprisingly has more mass, more pop, more bicep peak, and more hanging tricep sweep. Neckzilla's arms are pretty good, a lot more balanced, but again, overall smaller. I guess I could see the argument that his arms are better, but I wouldn't say so. I think even if Neckzilla won the arms though, it's simply not enough. Like I said, Andrew looked like a piece of art at the Texas Pro, and just winning the silhouette department alone with that margin is enough for that version to skate to victory. And I think the Olympia version would still beat Rubiel, but it's a lot closer. Andrew is only winning on the structure with this version because the overall shape he had at the Texas Pro is gone. He is not as conditioned and at the same time not as full. And him not peaking as well hurts his shape a little. And he doesn't have that wow factor in the muscle bellies anymore. I still have him win in the arms, and yes, he still does win in the aesthetics because Neckzilla was already just too far behind to begin with, so he wins in both scenarios, but keep an eye on these things going forward. The front lat spread is another pose that Andrew is just built for, quite literally. All of those same qualities that helped him in the front double, the structure, the pop, the polish are all helping him here. Not to mention his great lats, very full and they taper nicely. But Neckzilla has a much better pose here. His lats are also very good, better than his arms were. He is not as wide as Andrew across the shoulders, but he still sports some impressive lat width and honestly has slightly better taper. His lats just insert a bit lower. And Rubiel's X-frame is solid like in the first pose, probably even a little better though. He had a good X-frame in the front double, but he looked majorly bottom heavy because of those freaky legs. Well, now that he's spreading those wings and trying to make his upper body look as wide as possible, I think he has a bit more balance now, which makes a better X-frame. Overall, I really like this pose for Rubiel. He doesn't have the aesthetic appeal of Andrew, but he still does bring what we ask for. Most importantly, good lats and a good X-frame. But I still don't think that's quite enough for him to beat Andrew's Texas Pro version. I like his structure more, he's a lot wider, which would definitely help him on a real stage with these two guys, and his lats are still great. But Andrew has those finer details too, like those plentiful chest striations, great abs, fuller delts and arms, and more quad separation. Again, Andrew's just more polished and looks like a statue. I get the appeal of Neckzilla. Bodybuilding isn't an aesthetics contest, but aesthetics still count. And Andrew still has the better conditioning from the front and great lats. He's combining everything on top of looking like a statue. So that version is just too much for Rubiel. But there is a way better argument to be made for Neckzilla taking the dub over Andrew's Olympia version. If you look closely, the lats are probably a bit better on the Olympia version, but Andrew doesn't have the fullness or the extra refinements anymore. And I don't think that waist looks as tight, so he loses a little margin in the aesthetics. Overall, on an actual stage, I can see myself going with Andrew because he's a couple inches taller and he is wider. Those things will be a lot more apparent if these guys ever get on stage together. But as of right now, I do think I'm slightly favoring Rubiel on this shot. Andrew combined everything at the Texas Pro, but at the Olympia, he is missing the condition factor and a little of the aesthetics. And since Rubiel already had a huge size advantage, now that those other things are gone for Andrew, I do prefer Neckzilla over Andrew's Olympia version. I do think this would be even closer on a real stage, and I may even go with Andrew if my suspicions turn out to be true, but right now I'm going with Neckzilla over Olympia Andrew. Andrew may have had the advantage in those first two front shots, but when we turn to the side, he's no match for Rubiel, and that goes for either version. In the side chest, there is more emphasis put on thickness and overall mass and completeness, and that is Neckzilla in a nutshell. Andrew may be the Mona Lisa of bodybuilding, but Rubiel is literally nicknamed after a monster, and he definitely lives up to that nickname. Going body part for body part, Rubiel racks up a ton of wins. He definitely takes a dominant win on the side leg, I think we all saw that coming, but he doesn't just win in size, he clearly does win that, but I would also give Neckzilla the detail aspect too. You have to look closely because the lighting is very dim in Rubiel's photos, but he still has lines in the quads, hamstring details, and more vascularity. The hamstrings are a big weak point for Andrew, which is something we'll see more in the next pose. But even here we can see the lack of size and the lack of that drop. And his quads as a whole don't present well from this angle. At least at the Texas Pro version he was fuller and had a cleaner separation between glute, ham, and quad, but in Andrew's Olympia version he falls off so hard. He barely has any hamstring drop and he's much smoother. Then going up to the arm and delt, this is an area I would actually still give to Texas Andrew. I think his peaks look cool and his delt is super capped and that rear delt is really popping. But when you consider the Olympia version, Rubiel does take this area back because Andrew loses that pop and Rubiel was already thick in the arm and delt. Now on the pecs, the Olympia version can forget about it. That version's pecs are a lot flatter and not as detailed. But with the Texas Pro version, I think Neckzilla and Andrew are pretty similar. Andrew's still very full and has some good detail too. Rubiel's far pec does jut out a little farther, but he's probably slightly less detailed. Overall though, I do think Rubiel takes a win here. And then when we zoom out and judge the physiques as a whole and the mass and thickness from this angle, that's a major win for Neckzilla. Head to toe, he's much bigger and more developed. The Olympia version of Andrew with the lack of good detail and pop certainly is not taking this from Neckzilla. The Texas Pro version can try with all that extra fullness, but it's just not enough. In the rear double, both guys are not the best. I would say that this is probably both guys' weakest body part. In terms of the Olympia version of Andrew, just forget about it. This pose is all about detail. We want to see that detail and thickness in the back, striated glutes, dugout hams, etc. Andrew is wide. He is so wide structurally, how can he not also be in the back? But he's just too smooth in the back, plain and simple. And Rubiel continues to school both of Andrew's versions in the lower body, especially in that Olympia one. The glutes and hams have zero detail and the legs are pretty skinny with the big gap where the adductors should be. But the Texas Pro version does stand a better chance. In most areas, yes, I still don't think it's enough. Rubiel still wins in the lower body. Again, you have to look closely, but Rubiel's hams are more dug out than Andrew's, and Andrew doesn't even have the size in the hams to compete, even if they were even in detail, and his quad sweeps have nothing on Neckzilla's. I would probably give the glutes to Andrew though. Both guys only have faint striations, but I think they're a little more present in Andrew's glutes. But Rubiel still takes the lower body as a whole with ease. And then in the actual back, I think Andrew has a better upper back with more pronounced details, but Rubiel has the better lats, but does give up a little bit of that upper back detail to Andrew. I think both guys have good arms and delts, but Andrew has more pop in the delts and better bicep peaks, so he does take a win there for what it's worth. But overall in the entire upper body sum of parts, I do think Rubiel scores a key win here. Andrew really has the upper back going for him. Rubiel still has a good upper back, but better lats. They're a lot fuller all the way down to where they insert. And where they do insert in the lower back region, Rubiel wins that too. That lower back is tight and has some striations in there, some thick ones at that. Andrew Jacked is just devoid of anything going on in the lower back. Neckzilla is actually bringing a Christmas tree. I think Rubiel's back is slightly better than Andrew's was at the Texas Pro, but even if it was a little worse, with a much more developed lower body and really physique as a whole, he wins the rear double against both versions. The rear lat spread is a lot better of a pose for Andrew. Structurally, he is just super wide, and that's what this one is all about. But I actually don't think this is a pose where the Texas Pro version is the better one. I think he had yet to figure it out by that point. He has all that width, but he's not really showing most of it because he's hunching his spine over too much. He just struggled with execution. With that kind of posing, he is losing a lot of detail and he hinders his width. The Olympia version is definitely the superior one, even with a smaller lower body. Anyway, where does Neckzilla fall in here? Well, in this one, I'm actually splitting the pose and putting Neckzilla right in the middle. I think he does beat the Texas Pro Andrew. In the lower body, again, it isn't a contest for either version, for all the same reasons as in the rear double, but Andrew's Texas Pro version doesn't make it up with the back. Neckzilla's back is surprisingly not that wide in this one, despite being a big guy and having killer lats from the front, and even in the rear double. He still has a tight lower back with some good detail, and he has good taper. He just doesn't have those barn door lats like Andrew. But like I said, he's not showing that off in the Texas Pro version. Neckzilla does seem to have the drier and more detailed back, and is pretty close in terms of width because of the way Andrew is presenting. And with a solid win on the lower body, I do think Rubiel beats the Texas Pro version, but not the Olympia version. Sure, Rubiel wins in the lower body, but that back is just too much for him. Andrew's execution allows him to show off just how wide he truly is, and that is so much wider than Rubiel. Andrew is also more detailed here, surprisingly, and his lats are very thick. They're two huge, wide slabs of meat. Rubiel's back is looking a little flimsy compared to this version. The lower body does prevent Olympia Andrew from absolutely slamming the door on Neckzilla. Andrew does have a noticeable flaw in that lower body, but unlike the last back pose, I think Andrew's win in the actual lat lats and the rest of the back is resounding enough in this pose to prevail over Neckzilla and his freaky legs. The side tricep is a good pose for both guys. Well, kind of. Let's talk about Neckzilla versus the Texas Pro Andrew first. Does Andrew bring a good pose? Yes, absolutely. I love this variation for him. But this is not a true side tricep. And no, I'm not the only one to mark him down for this. After the Texas Pro show, the vice president of the NPC and IFBB made a video breakdown of that show. And he said he wants the competitors to hit it from the side. So Andrew responded to that criticism and hit it both ways at the Olympia. From the side like you see here, and more like how he did at the Texas Pro. But I only included the former so I didn't have to knock him down more than once. Anyway, back to the Texas Pro version. I'm such a big fan of this pose, but I do have to dock him for not hitting it correctly. Even if I didn't knock him down on points, I would still have Neckzilla winning over both versions. These side poses are all about looking thick and muscular, and that is Rubiel's strong suit. He looks like a monster in this even more than he did in the side chest somehow. I think what helps him here is honestly the waist. The stomach control and the legitimate taper that he has from the pecs down all the way into the waist is crazy. And when you go downstairs, you don't even need to look at Andrew's side leg in the Olympia version. He already beat the Texas Pro version in the side leg by virtue of it not being visible, since Andrew is turning to the front, but even if it was, Rubiel is always winning in the legs for sure. And then the tricep, Neckzilla has a thick and defined horseshoe. With all these good things going for him, he easily dispatches both versions. I think that even though the Olympia version doesn't get knocked down for that incorrect execution, that version is still even worse for Andrew. His tricep is not on Rubiel's level, neither are the legs, and with Rubiel's locked in stomach, I crazily enough prefer his midsection as a whole. Blasphemy, I know. So even though the Olympia version isn't penalized, I still think it's easily beaten. So yeah, the Texas Pro version does stand a better chance. Andrew looks like a work of art in that pose too, I can't lie. I do like it more. But come on, this is about being thick from the side, having a massive tricep, and you should be hitting this correctly. So I do think Andrew's Texas Pro version does get kind of close in my own personal ranking, just because I'm a fan of that pose, but objectively, Neckzilla wins this one. In the abs and thighs, I was pretty impressed with what Neckzilla does manage to pull off in this pose. Now, Andrew's Texas Pro version is light years ahead of just about everyone in the open division. I don't think we even need to discuss it. This is going to be one of the best abs and thighs poses of all time. He beats Neckzilla in aesthetics, flow, taper, things like that, and he beats him with the better abs and waistline as a whole. And in the quads, sizes and everything. I think Andrew looks massive and he clearly has more detail. So I do think he wins the quads over Rubiel, at least from this angle. That version of Andrew is just too much for anyone, not just Neckzilla. So we're really only talking about Rubiel and Andrew's Olympia version. Well, I said Neckzilla impressed me, but at the same time, Andrew's Olympia version is a big disappointment. Let's talk about the legs first. When Andrew doesn't have the cuts, it becomes a lot harder for him to win against Neckzilla's tree trunks. And Andrew was seemingly downsized at the Olympia. With him not bringing better details, being really blurry, and definitely giving up on the size area, this one goes to Rubiel. And then in the abs, Andrew looks a little washed out. Rubiel now overtakes him in both development and the chunkiness to the abs, as well as separation. The only part of the upper body that I would give to Andrew is the taper. Rubiel with his chunky obliques just doesn't have the best V taper. But can that really make the pose up for Andrew with the worst abs and quads? Well, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think Rubiel wins this pose over Andrew's Olympia version. From a pure bodybuilding perspective, this isn't close. Who has the most muscle in the quads, the best conditioning, the best abs development, things like that? Rubiel. In terms of bodybuilding qualities, he wins. With the better taper and structure, Andrew still does win in aesthetics, but is that enough? I'm sure it is for some, but not for me. Rubiel takes a surprising win over Andrew's Olympia version. Neckzilla finishes this comparison out strong with the most muscular pose. And a pose literally called the most muscular. Was there ever any doubt that Neckzilla was taking this one? Take your pick on which variation you want, either one beats both of Andrew's versions. And that's simply because of one thing, more muscle. Andrew has always had trouble executing this one too. It must be fairly difficult because he has longer limbs that can look lanky in this one, especially next to someone that's carrying Neckzilla levels of mass. In the Texas Pro version, I have to say he does get really close. He does have a lot of fullness to his muscles, so he can counteract a little bit of that lanky look, and the extra details help him out. But we do want to see the most muscle in this one, and you just don't get that from Andrew, even with his best iteration. Not against someone like Neckzilla. And then at the Olympia, it seems that he completely forgot how to hit a good most muscular, and opted for whatever that is. It definitely doesn't work even as a pose. It's incredibly awkward and forced. And with this kind of execution, he's making his waist look really big, and on top of that, his arms, chest, delts are not super flexed, so they were never going to look that big to begin with. Especially because we know by now that he was downsized and flat at the Olympia, so now he doesn't have the pop, the roundness, on top of looking pretty odd. What can I say? In a move that everyone saw coming, one of the most muscular guys on the planet wins the most muscular. Here are my final scorecards for this comparison. I went ahead and made 2 so that way things would be easy to understand and read. Andrew's Olympia version did lose this comparison pretty easily with 2 poses to Rubiel's 6. But what really surprised me was the score being almost the same for the Texas Pro version. The versions slightly switch around what poses they win and lose, but Rubiel still beat that version 5-3. But is that realistic? Well, for the Olympia version, I definitely believe it is. Andrew doesn't have that much muscle compared to someone like Neckzilla, but that's okay for Andrew usually. He brings probably the best aesthetics in the open IFBB, and he is usually at least decent in conditioning. But at the Olympia version, he was actually downsized, and his conditioning was a lot worse. He was smooth and watery in a lot of places. And with these 2 factors and the lack of good roundness in his normal shape, he didn't look as aesthetic. So this may be a hot take, but I will say that Andrew was more than vulnerable if he was bringing something like this to the 2024 Arnold Classic. Rubiel smoked him from the side. He kept those front poses a lot closer, even winning one in my eyes, the front lat spread. Maybe not on an actual stage, but we've yet to see that. Rubiel also won the abs and thighs of all poses against Andrew, so Rubiel did score a lot of big wins. Andrew would have had the presentation factor and the fact that he is a more established guy to help him out, but just objectively, I think Neckzilla would have been the victor more often than not between these 2 versions if you kept running scenarios. What about the Texas Pro version? Well, I actually have this flipped and I am pretty firm on this one. I do think the Texas Pro version would have prevailed on the Arnold Classic stage, but I'm sure some of you are going to say Rubiel won more mandatories. How is that possible? Well, mandatories are not everything. I think Rubiel's 6-2 victory in the mandatories against the Olympia version of Andrew was decisive, and it could have been a bigger lead too on another day. And I think his victory there transcended the mandatories because Andrew was missing size and conditioning. He didn't just lose the mandatories. Now I think what we have here is opposite in a couple of ways. The Texas Pro Andrew does have better condition pretty easily. The Texas Pro Andrew does beat Neckzilla in conditioning pretty easily, and the aesthetics are dang near perfect if you ask me. And with Andrew's added fullness here, I do think he doesn't look as out of place as the Olympia version would in terms of size. He definitely doesn't beat Neckzilla in terms of size, but he's at least a lot better. And in terms of the mandatories, I do think if we re-examine this on a different day, I would have Andrew winning about the same amount of poses, or maybe even one more than Neckzilla. I think there is a solid argument for Andrew in the rear double. I may even give it to him at this point, because after watching this video back and editing it, I do kind of side with Andrew more. And if I gave Texas Andrew the rear double, that would make this comparison a tie game. And for the poses that Andrew did win with this version, some were dominating wins. Those front shots and the abs and thighs were just lights out. The Olympia version only won one of those shots and only won that one by a smaller margin. And the Olympia version also had some big losses. The Texas Pro version doesn't suffer as big of losses. There are still some clear wins for Neckzilla in the side shots, but Andrew still had redeeming elements in either one of those. And in the most muscular, he at least looks good and competent with his variation. So anyway, when you dig a little deeper, Rubiel doesn't have that big of a lead. And Andrew would still have all those other qualities I talked about, like better conditioning and way better aesthetics. On top of those, he would also have better presentation and the fact that he was top 5 in the world in 2023, which, let's be honest, it always helps to be a more established guy. So could Neckzilla have defeated Texas Pro Andrew? Highly unlikely. Maybe on paper, sure, but Andrew gets beat by guys in mandatories a lot in my opinion, but he brings such a great physique as a whole that the judges tend to push him ahead of bodybuilders that may be more muscular or more complete. Not to mention the IFBB is seemingly moving into a more aesthetic direction, which of course would benefit Andrew jacked. Anyway, the moral of the story from today's comparison, this either could have gone really poorly or really well for Andrew. If that Olympia version went up against Neckzilla, I don't think it would have gone well for Andrew at all. But if we saw something more like the Texas Pro version, Andrew would have prevailed fairly easily. For those of you writing off Neckzilla saying he hasn't proved himself to be a serious contender or whatever, stop it. Because Neckzilla has also not proven himself to be a bad bodybuilder either. Quite the opposite. He just turned pro and only has one pro show under his belt, and already basically beating a top 5 Olympian, at least in this comparison, which is no small feat. I have to say, Neckzilla is the real deal, and these top guys need to watch out. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. How did you guys see this one? Do you think Neckzilla is too much of a freak to beat Andrew's Olympia version? Do you think Rubiel actually bested both versions? Leave me your thoughts down in the comments. If you guys like these types of videos and do want to see more, hit that like button. And I have way more Arnold Classic previews coming and all kinds of coverage, so subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my future videos. By the way, if you guys are looking for any high quality supplements, the ones I use personally, head over to armsracenutrition.com. Stock up on anything from protein to pre-workout, and at checkout, be sure to use my code PROJECT10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code PROJECT10 at armsracenutrition.com. Finally, with all of that said, I want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Get Neckzilla.